The auditorium was packed with proud families, their faces beaming with joy as they watched their children cross the stage to receive their diplomas. The air was filled with anticipation and the scent of fresh flowers that adorned the entire hall. I sat nervously among my fellow graduates, my heart pounding against my chest as I waited for my name to be called. "Rebecca Mitchell," the dean announced. I rose from my seat, my graduation gown flowing around me as I made my way to the stage. My eyes scanned the crowd, finally landing on my parents. They were there, of course, my father in his immaculate suit and my mother in her designer dress, both wearing the practiced smiles they reserved for public appearances. As I accepted my diploma, the audience applauded. I could see my parents clapping too, but their expressions were different from those of the other parents. There was no pride, no joy, just a cold, calculated acknowledgement of a social obligation fulfilled. After the ceremony, families gathered outside, taking photos and sharing embraces. I stood awkwardly beside my parents as they fielded congratulations from their acquaintances. "Harvard Business School next, right?" one of my father's business associates asked me. Before I could answer, my father placed his hand on my shoulder, his grip slightly too tight. "Yes, following in my footsteps. Though I'm not sure she has quite the same aptitude for finance." I forced a smile, swallowing the retort that threatened to escape. My GPA was higher than his had ever been, but that wasn't something he'd ever acknowledge. Later that evening, my parents hosted a lavish graduation party at our estate. The house was filled with their friends, business associates, and a few of my classmates whose parents ran in the same social circles as mine. The Mitchell family had to maintain appearances after all. I mingled politely, accepting congratulations and engaging in small talk, all while keeping an eye on the ornate grandfather clock in the hall. I had somewhere to be later, and for once I wasn't going to let my parents' schedule dictate mine. As the evening progressed, my father called for everyone's attention, raising his crystal champagne flute. A toast to my daughter Rebecca on her graduation day. The guests raised their glasses, and I felt a momentary flicker of hope. Perhaps just this once, he would express genuine pride in my accomplishments. "To Rebecca," he continued, "who has managed to graduate with honors despite her unconventional approach to her studies. Let's hope Harvard will provide the structure she needs to truly excel." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "And perhaps teach her some financial responsibility. Lord knows she hasn't learned it from us, despite our best efforts." Laughter rippled through the crowd, the polite, uncomfortable kind that follows a joke made at someone else's expense. I maintained my smile, years of practice making it second nature to hide my true feelings. "We'll never trust you with money, Rebecca," my father said, his voice lowered as he moved closer to me after the toast, speaking for my ears only. "You've proven that time and again. It's why your trust fund has such strict conditions." My mother joined us, her smile never faltering as she whispered, "4 years of college, and you still can't seem to grasp the value of $1. It's why we've had to keep such tight control." I nodded silently, not trusting myself to speak. They were referring to my frivolous spending, donations to homeless shelters, funding for art programs in underprivileged schools, and contributions to environmental conservation efforts. In their eyes, these were wasteful expenditures, not aligned with the Mitchell family values of accumulation and status. What my parents didn't know, what they had never bothered to discover, was that I had been quietly building my own fortune throughout college. The app I had developed in my sophomore year had been acquired by a major tech company. The financial literacy platform I created for underprivileged communities had attracted significant venture capital, and the investment strategy I had implemented with my modest allowance had yielded returns that would have made even my father raise an eyebrow. As the party continued around me, I excused myself, claiming I needed some fresh air. Instead, I slipped into my father's study and opened my laptop. With a few keystrokes, I accessed my private banking portal, The balance stared back at me. 4,218,697.43. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Was I really going to do this? Cut myself off from my family's wealth entirely, rely solely on what I had built myself? The memory of my parents' words, "We'll never trust you with money," steeled my resolve. I executed the transfer, moving the entire sum to a separate secure account that my parents had no knowledge of or access to. Then I drafted 2 emails, one to my parents' attorney, relinquishing my claim to my trust fund, and another to the family accountant, removing myself from all Mitchell family financial entities. As I closed my laptop, a strange sense of calm washed over me. For years, my parents had used money as a means of control, doling out approval along with allowances, threatening to cut me off whenever I strayed from their prescribed path. Now, I was cutting the strings myself. I rejoined the party, my expression betraying nothing of the momentous decision I had just made. My parents continued to entertain their guests, unaware that their financial hold over me had just been severed. The next morning, I came down to breakfast to find my parents already seated at the dining table, laptops open, expressions grim. "Rebecca," my father began, his voice dangerously quiet, "would you care to explain these emails?" I took my seat, reaching for the coffee pot with a steady hand. "I think they're quite clear, Father. I no longer wish to be financially tied to the Mitchell family." "This is ridiculous," my mother hissed. "You can't possibly support yourself. This is just another one of your rebellious phases." I poured my coffee calmly. "Actually, I can support myself quite well. I've been doing so for some time now." My father's face reddened. "With what money? Your paltry internship stipends?" "No," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. "With the proceeds from my tech company acquisition, my venture capital funding, and my investment portfolio. I've been busy during college, you see, just not in the ways you've chosen to notice." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in my life, I saw something I had never witnessed before. My parents were speechless. The control they thought they had over me, the leverage they had always wielded so confidently, had vanished overnight. "How much?" my father finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Enough," I answered. "More than enough." My mother's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "This is absurd. You're barely 22. You can't possibly have $4,218,697.43, I stated, meeting her gaze steadily. "As of last night, though the markets have been open for an hour now, so the figure has likely changed slightly." My father's face cycled through a range of emotions, disbelief, anger, and finally, a calculating interest that I recognized all too well. "Rebecca, let's discuss this rationally. Whatever point you're trying to make—" "I'm not trying to make a point," I interrupted, something I had never dared to do before. "I'm making a choice. You've made it abundantly clear that you'll never trust me with money. I've simply removed the need for your trust entirely." "Where did this money come from?" my father demanded, his business instincts taking over. "Who did you work with? Which firms? Which investors?" I smiled. "Does it matter? You've never shown interest in my projects before. Why start now?" "Because you're a Mitchell," he said, as if that explained everything. "Whatever you've built, whatever you've earned, it's because of the opportunities we provided, the education we paid for, the connections we facilitated." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "and I'm grateful for those advantages. But the decisions, the work, the vision, those were mine. And now, so are the results." My mother's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table. "Darling, you're being hasty. There's no need for such dramatic gestures. If you felt we were too restrictive with your allowance, we could have discussed adjustments." The condescension in her tone made something harden within me. "This isn't about an allowance, Mother. This is about autonomy, about respect. Neither of which I've received from either of you when it comes to my financial decisions, or frankly, any of my decisions." "Respect is earned," my father retorted. "Yes," I agreed. It is, and I've earned it. Just not in your eyes. I stood up, my breakfast untouched. I'll be moving out today. I've already signed a lease on an apartment in the city. My father pushed his chair back abruptly. This is ridiculous. Where is this coming from? You've never expressed such ingratitude before. I'm not ungrateful, I clarified. I acknowledge the privileges I've had, but gratitude doesn't mean I have to accept control or condescension. Not anymore. My mother's expression softened slightly, adopting the persuasive look she used when negotiating with difficult charity board members. Rebecca, darling, think of your future. The Mitchell name opens doors. Your father's connections can secure opportunities that others spend lifetimes chasing. I've already opened my own doors, I replied, and made my own connections. The silence returned, heavier this time. My parents exchanged glances, a wordless communication honed over decades of marriage. My father nodded slightly and my mother turned back to me. At least tell us about these ventures of yours, she said, curiosity finally breaking through her disapproval. This tech company, what does it do? I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep my accomplishments to myself, as they had been for years. But another part recognized this moment for what it was, perhaps the first time my parents were seeing me as an individual, not just an extension of themselves. It's a platform that connects college students with micro-internships in their fields of interest, I explained. Companies post short-term projects. Students apply based on their skills and availability, and the algorithm matches them. It helps students build real-world experience and portfolios while still focusing on their studies. My father's eyebrows rose slightly. And this was acquired? By Tech Future Labs last year? I confirmed. I maintained a stake in the company and a position on the advisory board. Last year, my mother repeated. While you were still in college, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her incredulously. I tried, Mother. 3 times. Once when the acquisition talks began, once when the deal was finalized, and once when the first payment came through. Each time, you and Father were too busy with your own affairs to listen. My father cleared his throat, discomfort evident in his posture. And this financial literacy platform you mentioned? It provides education and practical tools for managing money to communities that typically don't have access to such resources, I said. It's particularly focused on first-generation college students and families below the poverty line. My mother's lips pursed. That sounds like one of your charitable endeavors, not a business. It's both, I replied. We use a freemium model. The basic financial education is free for everyone, but we offer premium features and personalized planning for those who can afford it. The profits from the premium subscriptions fund the free access and continued development. And this attracted venture capital? My father asked, professional interest beginning to override his personal frustration. Yes, a Series A round of $2.7 million closed 3 months ago. My father leaned back in his chair, reassessing me with new eyes. You did all this while maintaining your GPA without our knowledge or assistance? Yes, I said simply. Why? My mother asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. Why the secrecy? I considered her question carefully. It wasn't secrecy initially. It was protection. I needed to know I could do this on my own, without your influence or interference. And then, when it started to succeed, when I realized I was building something meaningful, I tried to share it with you, but you weren't interested. That's not fair, my father protested. We've always supported your education, your future. You've supported the future you envisioned for me, I corrected him. Not the one I was actually creating. I glanced at my watch. I need to go. The movers will be here in an hour. You're really leaving? My mother's voice held a note of vulnerability I'd rarely heard before. Yes, I confirmed. I need to establish my independence, not just financially, but in every sense. My father stood up, straightening his suit jacket, a gesture he always made before entering difficult negotiations. Rebecca, I think we should discuss this further. Perhaps we've been overly critical of your financial decisions, but cutting ties completely seems extreme. I studied my father's face, searching for sincerity. There was calculation there, as always, but also something else. A flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even respect. This isn't about cutting ties completely, I clarified. This is about redefining our relationship. I'll always be your daughter, but I need to be my own person first. D, and you believe moving out, rejecting your trust fund, and severing all financial connections is the way to do that? My mother asked, her voice tight. Yes, I said simply, because money has always been the primary way you've exerted control over me. It's been the subtext of every family discussion, every decision about my life. I took a deep breath. I don't want to fight. I just want to live my life on my terms, to succeed or fail based on my own decisions. My father sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older than his 57 years. And if you fail, what then? Then I fail, I replied. And I learn from it and I try again. Isn't that what you've always preached about business, Father? That failure is inevitable, but giving up is unacceptable. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Using my own words against me. Well played. The doorbell rang, echoing through the grand foyer. That will be the movers, I said, standing up. I've already packed what I need. My mother's eyes widened. Already packed? When did you do that? Over the past week, I admitted. I've been preparing for this for some time. My father studied me with new eyes. You really thought this through? Yes. Unlike what you both seem to believe, I don't make impulsive financial decisions. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. I'd like to invite you both to dinner next Friday. Not at the club, not at any of your usual restaurants. I've made reservations at a new place downtown that I think you might enjoy. My treat. My mother looked startled. Your treat? Yes, I said firmly. I'd like to start our new relationship by breaking bread together as equals. My father stood again, adjusting his cufflinks. Another nervous habit. You're very determined about this, aren't you? I learned determination from you, Father. For the first time that morning, a genuine smile crossed his face. So you did. The movers were efficient, loading the relatively few boxes I had packed. Most of what filled my bedroom at the family estate had never really been mine. The furniture selected by my mother's decorator, the artwork chosen to match the home's aesthetic, the books that were more for show than reading. What I took were my personal items, clothes, photographs, the books I had actually read and loved, my tech equipment, and a few mementos from my childhood that held genuine meaning. As the movers carried the last box out, I stood in the grand entryway with my parents. The silence between us was different now, not comfortable, but not hostile either. You'll let us know if you need anything, my mother asked, her voice carrying a hint of vulnerability I'd rarely heard before. I will, I promised, but I won't need financial assistance. There are other kinds of support, my father said quietly, though I suppose we haven't been very good at providing those. I was stunned by this admission. Perhaps the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him. No, I agreed gently, but it's never too late to learn. I hugged them both, somewhat awkwardly. Physical affection had never been common in our household. Then I walked out the door toward my car, feeling the weight of their gaze on my back. As I drove away from the estate, a mix of emotions washed over me: fear, exhilaration, uncertainty, and, most surprisingly, hope. For the first time in my life, I was truly on my own, beholden to no one. The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. My new apartment was in a renovated industrial building downtown, not the luxury high-rise my parents would have expected, but a space with character, history, and an energy that resonated with me. The concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and large windows overlooking the city skyline made it feel both grounded and full of possibility. The movers placed my boxes in the living area and departed. I stood alone in my new home, the silence enveloping me like a blank canvas, waiting for the first stroke of paint. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was from my investment app. One of my holdings had increased by 3% that morning. I smiled at the irony. While my parents were still processing the revelation of my financial independence, the very money they didn't believe I could manage was already growing. I spent the day unpacking and setting up my workspace. By evening, the apartment was beginning to feel like home, my home, reflecting my tastes and priorities rather than my parents' expectations. As the sun set over the city, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the lights come on across the skyline. My phone rang, a video call from my best friend, Zoe. "So, how did they take it?" she asked as soon as her face appeared on screen. "About as well as could be expected," I replied. Shock, disbelief, a bit of anger, and then something like respect, I think. Zoe snorted. "Respect from the mighty Mitchells, that's a first." "Maybe," I conceded. "Or maybe they're just regrouping, planning their next move. I've invited them to dinner next week." "Bold move," Zoe commented. "You really think they'll come?" "I do," I said, surprising myself with my certainty. "They're curious now. For the first time, they're seeing me as someone they don't fully understand or control. That's new territory for them. And for you," Zoe pointed out, "how does it feel, being truly independent?" I considered the question, watching the city lights below. Scary, exhilarating, real. "Well, I'm proud of you," Zoe said firmly. "It took guts to do what you did." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and checked my emails. There were several messages from my business partners, updates on projects, and inquiries from potential investors who had heard about my work. Life was continuing, momentum building. The next morning, I woke up in my own space, on my own schedule. No family breakfast to navigate, no subtle critiques of my plans for the day. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and began working on my next project, an expansion of the financial literacy platform to include resources for small business owners in underserved communities. Midway through the morning, a text message arrived from my father. "Your mother and I have been discussing your ventures. Would like to hear more. Looking forward to dinner Friday." I stared at the message, reading between the lines. This wasn't an apology, but it was an opening, an acknowledgement that perhaps they had misjudged me, that there might be value in what I had built. The week passed quickly, filled with meetings, development work, and settling into my new life. By Friday evening, I felt a nervous energy as I prepared for dinner with my parents. This would be our first meeting as adults, without the power dynamics that had defined our relationship for my entire life. I arrived at the restaurant early. It wasn't the type of establishment my parents typically frequented. No white tablecloths or sommelier, no valet parking or Michelin stars. Instead, it was a warm, vibrant place owned by a young chef who had worked his way up from food trucks to create one of the most innovative dining experiences in the city. My parents arrived precisely on time, my father checking his watch as they entered. Some habits never changed. They looked slightly out of place among the younger, more casually dressed crowd, but they made an effort to hide their discomfort. "Rebecca," my mother greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. "This is interesting. The chef was featured in Food and Wine last month," I told her, knowing she would appreciate the validation. "He's doing amazing things with local ingredients." We were seated at a corner table with a view of both the open kitchen and the street outside. After ordering drinks, an awkward silence fell. "So," my father finally said, "tell us more about these ventures of yours." For the next hour, I shared the details of my businesses, the challenges, the successes, the vision for the future. To my surprise, they listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than skepticism. "The financial literacy platform," my father mused, "it's actually quite innovative. Have you considered partnering with community colleges? They could offer it as part of their curriculum." "I've had preliminary discussions with a few," I replied, pleasantly surprised by his suggestion. But expanding to a national program would require additional funding. I might know some people who would be interested, he offered tentatively, if you're open to introductions. I considered his offer carefully. Introductions would be welcome, but I want to be clear, these would be legitimate business connections, not favors to you. Any investors would need to believe in the mission, not just the Mitchell name. My father nodded slowly. Understood, and fair. My mother, who had been quieter, finally spoke up. I still don't understand why you felt you needed to keep all of this secret from us, to move out so dramatically. I sighed, placing my fork down. It wasn't about secrecy, Mother. It was about independence. And I tried to share my work with you both many times. But you were always more interested in directing my path than understanding the one I was already on. She flinched slightly, but didn't argue. The truth is, I continued gently, I needed to prove to myself that I could do this without your influence or connections. And I needed you both to see me as my own person, not just your daughter who needs guidance. And the $4 million, my father asked, was that necessary to make your point? It wasn't about making a point, I replied. It was about having the freedom to make my own choices, my own mistakes. You've always used money as the measure of success and as a tool for control. I needed to remove that dynamic from our relationship. The waiter arrived with our main courses, providing a momentary respite from the intensity of our conversation. As we began to eat, my father cleared his throat. Your mother and I have been talking, he said carefully. We may have been overly controlling regarding your choices. Coming from him, this was equivalent to a profound apology. We were raised with certain ideas about family, legacy, and responsibility, my mother added. Perhaps we've been too rigid in applying those same expectations to you. I felt a tightness in my chest ease slightly. I'm not rejecting our family or its legacy, I assured them. I'm just defining my own relationship to it, on my own terms. And those terms include buying dinner, my father noted with a hint of a smile, gesturing around the restaurant. Yes, I confirmed, among other things. As we finished our meal and said our goodbyes outside the restaurant, my mother hugged me with unexpected warmth. We're proud of you, she whispered, even if we haven't shown it properly. My father extended his hand, then seemed to reconsider and pulled me into a brief, awkward hug as well. The dinner invitation stands, I told them. Same time next week, different restaurant. They both nodded, and for the first time in my memory, there was no calculation in their expressions, just a tentative openness to something new. As I watched them walk to their car, I realized that the $4 million I had locked away wasn't just about financial independence. It was about breaking a cycle, about creating the possibility for a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than control and obligation. The silence at breakfast that morning after graduation had indeed been worth more than the money itself. It was the sound of old patterns breaking, of new possibilities emerging. And as I turned toward my own car, I felt lighter than I had in years, ready to build not just my own future, but perhaps a new kind of family connection as well.